Well, April is a super fun month to fish, of course, unless you're up where I'm at and where it was snowing just a few minutes ago. But in so many parts of the country, a lot of the fish are shallow in multiple stages of the spawn, unless you're way up north. So April is one of those months where I'm targeting lots of shallow cover, and the lures that I have picked reflect that choice. And depending where you're at in the spawn, you could have fry out there already, and when you've got bass fry and fry garters, they're going to be bunched up in very specific targets and some vegetation up underneath some wood, places where those fry can be protected. So a lot of the lures I have selected are ones that you can be covering some water and then without changing anything or retying, hit very specific targets, which I really feel is key in the month of April. Number one is going to be a swim jig. You know I throw a swim jig throughout much of the year, but right now the reason I love it is because I can cover water when fish are up shallow along these shorelines, cover a lot of water quickly, but I can also fish it like a regular jig. I can target certain things, let it drop, sit on the bottom, no big deal, then pick it up and then start to swim it and move right down the shoreline again. My favorite for a lot of the waters I fish are bluegill types of colors, but if you have a lot of shad in your waters, those white silvers are going to do really well, especially because in southern parts of the country, you could be already getting into the shad spawn. So if you've got that, definitely your whites. Otherwise, your bluegills are excellent colors. Multiple retrieves you can use. You can go ahead and Alabama shake it. My favorite, of course, is just doing a very slow pulsing type of a retrieve. But a swim jig is a great lure in April, and I fish it way into May, and like I said, throughout much of the year as well. Now, number two, I've actually got two lures in there. So I suppose you could look at it as 2 or 3 or 2A and 2B, but both of these do essentially the same thing, and that's why I lump them together. The first one is going to be a bright colored worm or a floating worm. This one I've got in bubble gum, and it's actually a Lastec, so it does float really well. And then up the line a little bit, I have a swivel. I like that little bit of extra weight, not only to help cast it, but also to give it a slow sink. And the main reason for the bright colors is because this time of year in April, with all of these shallow fish, you really need to be able to see the lure. There's a lot of times, especially if you've got some fish that are more interested in protecting their spawning areas, they're just going to grab this lure and move it, not necessarily eat it. And that's where the bright colors, your bubble gums, methylates, whites, these types of things, you can see that in the water, and when it starts to swim off, you know that you've got a fish on there. But the floating worm, bright colored worms are really good in April. And then along with it, I'm going to go really old school. You hear a few anglers talk about this. If you search out there on YouTube, you'll run across it a few times, but just not a lot. And that is an old school floating jerk bait. This one is balsa, and I like it because you can fish it up there shallow where a lot of the bass are, and over the tops of all kinds of cover, lay down vegetation, whatever. And I like to fish it very similar to that floating worm. Just give it little twitches, maybe a slight reel with the handle, and just little pulls and let it float back up to the top. You're almost fishing it like a topwater, like you would a popper, but you can cover water with it, and then you can also lay it alongside or set it over the tops, I should say, of very specific targets and just twitch it or leave it sit there. So an old school floating jerkbait can be really, really good in the month of April. Number 3 is going to be a Wacky Rig. How can you not have a Wacky Rig tied on this time of year? It's so good for picking apart very specific targets, and when those fish can be finicky because they're up shallow, the weather changes, whatever it might be, that just very slow sink and shimmy is just a dynamite lure. And yes, you can skip it up underneath docks and brush and all kinds of things. So a Wacky Rig, I know a lot of you are going to have that tied on pretty much all throughout the year anyway, but definitely in April, a Wacky Rig is a go-to. Before we get to number 4, my Bass Behavior Bundle is active. I've got the first newsletter coming out here next week, and then our first live stream for members is in a couple weeks. Check it out on the link down below. And number 4 is I'm going to Texas rig creature baits, whether they are small little creature baits like this one here or great big magnum size creature baits. I like the creature baits with a very small worm weight because they fall slow through the water column. I don't want them shooting down to the bottom really quickly. I just want that slow fall. And this is going to be set up on my boat deck for targeting specific cover, a lot like a Wacky Rig, but these little creature baits with appendages drop through the water a little bit slowly. This one is actually an old one. It's a Wild Thing with an A, Wild Thing Junior, that was discontinued many, many years ago, but I still have hundreds of them. One of my all-time favorites. But any of your brush hogs, you know, those types of things, creature baits are something I really like this time of year. And hey, if you'd like to watch a video about 4 presentations for the tube that you just don't see a lot of people doing anymore because it's kind of fallen out of popularity, but boy, what a opportunity for anglers, because it's something different this time of year when there's a lot of pressure on our lakes. If you'd like to watch that video, go ahead and check this one out right here, and make sure that you go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.